there we go. And yeah, I'm Gavin Reid. I'm the CISO of Human Security. Human Security is a company or a platform that protects other large internet platforms in the world against automated attacks. And we're going to talk about one of the ones we protected against today. I've been at Human for about 3.5 years, and my co-presenter here is Lindsay. I'll let her present herself.
All right, I'm Lindsay Kaye. I'm Vice President of Threat Intelligence here at Human. I've been here about 2 years, and my technical specialty is malware analysis and reverse engineering.
So why do people go and do the type of fraud that we're going to talk about today? And really what we're talking about here is the money involved in programmatic advertising. So, as I'm sure everyone in this room is well aware, a lot of what fuels the internet that we know and the careers that we have revolves around internet advertising. It's a very big business. There's a lot of money, and if you can skim a little bit of that money off of it anywhere transactionally, kind of like Office Space, you can very quickly get into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you think of advertising, previous to the internet advertising that we all know and love so much, people would do adverts on TVs and magazines and stuff, and it was, useful, but no one really understood, are they reaching the people that they want to reach? Does it actually help? There was no actual real figures. People did advertising, but there was no way to sort of prove that it actually worked. That all changed with, with internet. When you jump on your web browser, they can target a specific demographic. They can target a specific, person, geography, age group, and not only can they see that you've seen the ad, they can see if you've clicked on it. And even more, they can decide, they can see, did that click actually lead to a sale? And so that's like nirvana for advertisers in the world, because you could really understand if you were, say, a locksmith in New York, if you advertised, for people that were searching for locksmiths, in New York, in Google at 10 o'clock to 3 in the morning, what your conversion rate was. And so you could say, well, look, if I spend $100 in advertising a month, I'm getting 1 or 2 sales, and I double it to 200, and I get a couple more, and then I actually put in maybe $2,000, and you can sort of work on that slope of scale of where you should actually be advertising to get the most return on your investment. So there's a lot of money involved in advertising. And there's a lot of fraud involved in it. We're going to talk about a number of different ones today, but to sort of really understand if you're just seeing an ad when you're, say, browsing the web, or you're, viewing or listening to Spotify, that might be a penny, right? It may be a fraction of a penny. It could be very inexpensive. If you see an ad when you've done a specific search for something, it goes up exponentially. And then if you actually click on said ad, and that ad again leads to some sort of revenue situation, we're talking 10x, 20x, 100x of the original. So something going from a penny to $10 to even more. So there's a fair bit amount of money involved in doing this, and so there's a lot of reasons why people might want to do some fraudulent stuff. Today in Konfety, this is one of the sort of ad frauds. We're probably tracking now maybe 20 different ad fraud campaigns that are going on that we're trying to shut down concurrently. The Konfety one you can see, and I'm not going to go through each one of these, but it's going to look at click fraud, which is obviously a big deal, right? So if you want to do fraudulent advertisement and you want to siphon money from that poor locksmith in New York, well, if you can click on that ad, he has to pay a lot more, right? So if you're a fake publisher, if you're publishing fake ads, you're saying that they got clicked on by people that are actually looking for things, if you can actually have them clicked on, you can start making a lot more money. So why is it so easy? First off, we talked about there's just so much money involved in this. This all happens, programmatic advertising happens when you open an app on your phone. It immediately says, hey, Gavin's looking at, something, or he's running Spotify. Would you like to sell him an ad? And And then again, at the speed of light, someone says, yes, I would, and I'll spend X money, and there's a little bit of a bidding war. So you might have pre-said, if you're locksmith one in New York and Gavin's looking for a locksmith, you may say, I'll spend up to $10 for an ad, and someone's searching. If someone else says, I'll spend up to $11, up to $2,000 a month, whatever, they're going to win that particular bid. So in order to, our platform itself, we're directly in line, and so we have to do decisioning pretty quickly, right? No one wants their stuff to be slowed down in any way whatsoever. And then, of course, there's a lot of new stuff coming out, specifically in mobile and CTV. Connected TV devices are a new source of ads, like maybe an old source if you go back to the old TV ads, but they're one that's becoming increasingly hard to skip. And then lastly, there's just low legal risk. I only know of one person that's been prosecuted for this successfully and is currently serving time. We have a number of different, ongoing lawsuits. We work with a bunch of different people inside of law enforcement, but it's really hard. And then, these things also prop fake content. So not only do they do bad stuff, not only do they cost real people money, but they actually help sort of this disinformation. Disinformation leads to a lot of clicks, and they're very easy to monetize through some of these fraudulent advertisements. And the big thing to get from here is it's one of the biggest unmonitored capital flows on the internet. And we're estimating it at about $100 billion a year is being siphoned off by these fraudsters, right? And this is money that, we talked about the poor guy in New York whose locksmith company gets broken, but it's also the content creators who are, it's the Atlantic Monthlies of the world, the New Yorkers who are putting this content out there and they're monetizing it through ads. If the ads are fraudulent, then they can no longer create the content that we sort of know and love. And then, of course, and I think this is my last slide, they become building blocks for cybercrime. So we spend a lot of time looking at residential proxies because they're how these ad frauds are usually perpetrated. And as we watch these, like if you go to all of the talks and all of the conferences this week, you'll probably hear about a number of different attacks. I'll tell you, if they've happened in the last year, we have seen them, right? Because this same infrastructure is used, by multiple different criminal actors. So whether they're doing ransomware, initial access, whatever, they're using the same sort of common infrastructure to do these things. And with that, what we're going to do now is, I talked in the abstract. Lindsay's going to talk specifically about one particular attack called Konfety.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. Cool. So the particular campaign I'm going to talk about today is called Konfety. So basically what I want you to take away from this is that advertising fraud is a real thing that keeps happening. So Gavin gave you a little bit of the justification of why you should care, but one of the things that we've been seeing over the past couple years is that despite the fact that we get better at detecting these different types of campaigns, they are getting more sophisticated. And I'll talk a little bit today about one of the particularly interesting and novel methods that a threat actor used to conduct their fraud. So last year, I believe it was about this time last year, we actually published a report when we talked a little bit about the disruption of a campaign that we called Konfety. So this was a mobile advertising fraud, so based on Android devices, that used a novel evasion method that we call the evil twin method. So this was the first time that we'd ever seen a threat actor actually use this, and what it did is really alter the paradigm of how we were seeing threat actors conduct ad fraud. So I'll talk a little bit about that later, but it helped them really operate under the radar and be a little bit harder to detect and ultimately demonetize. So the way that this evil twin worked was there were two sets of applications. So one was a set of decoy applications that were kept in the Google Play Store. So we found over 250 of these apps in the Play Store, and they didn't really do much of anything. So they weren't malicious, they weren't conducting ad fraud, all they did was exist. We'll look at a couple examples later. But in parallel, what you had was specially crafted evil twin applications that were outside of the Play Store. So the way that these worked were, these were using the identifiers and the attributes of the decoy twins to fraudulently generate ads. So that's where all the ad fraud was happening. But the way that this scheme worked was because these apps were effectively in a pair. So we'll look at how that works later. And the way that the publisher accounts were used made it look like the fraud was coming from these decoy twins rather than these evil twins. So that was one part of the scheme that made the threat actors more successful. So Gavin talked a little bit about numbers, but what we saw was that at its peak, Konfety reached 10 billion fraudulent bid requests per day. So in case this sounds like a lot, this is a lot. So oftentimes we see campaigns in the millions. This was a particularly big one at 10 billion before we disrupted it. So as you can probably imagine, Konfety is not the only campaign out there. So while we have disrupted Konfety, there are many other threat actors that we continue to track, but we'll talk a little bit at the end about how campaigns like this will impact digital marketing and ad tech, and then all the rest of us as well, for years to come. So as a brief overview of Konfety, so like I said, this was a novel method for conducting ad fraud. So generally up until this point, what we had seen was kind of two ways that threat actors would release malicious apps. So one was they would sneak them into the Google Play Store or Apple Store, and just kind of hope that nobody would notice anything when they did the assessment. Eventually, what you see is that companies like us and then other researchers would flag these apps, and ultimately they would be taken down. So really, they were in a race against time. Or what you would see is threat actors would have malicious apps outside of the official app stores. So many of us know not to generally download these apps onto our devices, but some people really don't care. So that was another way that they conduct fraud. So maybe a little bit less effective, but those are your effective two ways that they were getting them on. So this was different. So when we look at what the decoy twins look like, you can see a couple of examples. So these are super generic, very much template-based games. Not wildly interesting, maybe look okay, but they're really not particularly distinctive or really exciting and compelling. And then if you look at their appads.txt, what you see is that they are nearly identical. So this really suggests that maybe the same developer is behind them, maybe the same group of developers behind them, but what you're seeing is not super innovative, super fun games. They're generic. So for each of these decoy twins that were in the Google Play Store, they had, again, that corresponding evil twin. So if you look at both of these side by side, they have nothing in common. The only thing that they share is identifiers, and we'll look at examples of that soon. But what they did share was that they had this SDK called Caramel Ads. So the evil twins were abusing this to conduct ad fraud, while the decoy twins had a more full version of the SDK, but this was the one commonality that really linked them together. So, like I said, the decoy twins, you get them from the Google Play Store, but the evil twins were delivered separately. So generally what we saw was malvertising, clickbaiting, and drive-by attacks. So by having the decoy twin, that doesn't mean you get the good twin installed on your device and vice versa. So the only relation is the shared identifiers to make it look like the advertising is coming from legitimate apps. So in addition to advertising fraud, we saw the evil twins conduct other different types of fraud. So things like browser search monitoring, so when the user types in something into the browser, it's able to monitor it. Some code side loading, so pretty much it can pull down or take additional code, install it and run it. So the user probably doesn't necessarily intend for that to happen. And then something called intent filter intercepts. So most people probably have a mobile device in this room, and you've ever been kind of surfing in an app, and then what it'll say is, oh, it looks like you're trying to open a link for, in this case, Wikipedia. Would you like to open this in the Wikipedia app if you have it installed? Yeah, let me do that. So what Konfety did was they actually abused this functionality. So you can see an example for Wikipedia here. What it would do is say, hey, do you want to open this Wikipedia? If you don't have it installed, click on Chrome instead, in this case, and then you get a link to more malware or other bad things or phishing. Generally, whatever the threat actor wants. So if we look at kind of the overarching diagram of how Konfety works, what we can see here is kind of this flow chart. So first, you have your decoy twins that you get from the Google Play Store. And the commonality that they had is we think that they are linked somehow to people affiliated with Caramel Ads, but ultimately abusing that SDK. And they beacon to a certain set of servers associated with the Caramel Ads SDK. Separately, what you have is those evil twins. So these evil twins have several different stages to them, and like I said, that abbreviated version of the SDK, but they are beaconing to that same set of servers, which helped us identify a link there. Those are the ones that are showing the video ad impressions, like Gavin said, doing some click fraud, other types of ad fraud, ultimately nothing good. And the way that you get them is through multiple malware ad campaigns. So I hope this kind of clarifies how you get each type of app. So how the evil twin method works. So what you see is that you have an example of the decoy twin on your left. So in the Google App Store, just that generic template-based game. But what I want you to see is that you have the app ID. So what this happens is that the evil twin version of this takes this identifier, so publisher IDs as well as this app ID, and then uses it to make it look like it's a legitimate one. But what you can see here is that these apps have no, like, if you look at them, they don't look related at all. The only relation is their identifier. So you can see, for example, how a drive-by download campaign was delivering the corresponding evil twin version of Impossible Track Speed Bump. So obviously they look nothing alike, but that shows you kind of at a technical level how that works. So Caramel Ads, like I said, was abused by the evil twins. So a couple different ways. So largely how the abuse was perpetrated was when Caramel Ads SDK reaches out to its servers and pulls down new instructions, effectively from its C2. The way that it was processing these server response values was where most of the abuse was happening, because the way that it was kind of, I guess, reading through, and then there was kind of less validation. Anyway, so you could also pull down malicious ads or something like that as well, depending. But the ones I want to highlight today is that you can make the traffic, if you were that malicious app, look like it was coming from any type of device the threat actor chooses. So Gavin talked a little bit about CTV and mobile as well. So if you, let's say, could make more money off of being a CTV device and showing an ad as if you were a CTV device, you could say, aha, I'm a CTV device, and then the threat actor would make more money there. So similarly, it was, you only want to show ads to real human beings. So if the device was, let's say, an emulator, most people don't want to show ads to an emulator because they want actual human eyes on them. The device could pretend to be a real device instead of that emulator, to give you an idea of how this works. Then what you could do is you could force the device to open any URL that you want. So this obviously could be used for totally benign things, but it could also take the user to other malicious sites. So for phishing, additional malware downloads, really whatever the threat actor wants. Then the ability to selectively render ads. So generally what happens is if an advertiser pays to show a user an ad, they want the user to actually see it. However, the device and the malicious app can make now the decision to show it or not. Similarly, there is no validation for a lot of the ad content. So no check that the device is real before showing the ad or requesting it. No check that the ads have rendered correctly. And then really any of the other common checks that most SDKs in well-established networks would be doing. So very kind of suspicious there. So when we look at how the ad fraud actually looks from a victim perspective, here's a couple of examples. So you can see an example of a full screen ad. You can see those really hard to escape ads. All of this is considered ad fraud based on kind of the definition thereof. Sometimes you'll see stacked ads, which is exactly what it sounds like. So the device will be claiming to show 12 ads to the user, but they're all in the exact same location. So really the user isn't seeing all of them. So again, ad fraud. And then what it does is it'll exploit notifications to engage the victims. So sometimes you get notifications on your device. You can click on it or not. What the malicious apps do is they pop down the notification and kind of force you to accidentally click on them. So again, fraudulent as well. So I talked a little bit about how the evil twins were distributed. And here you can see a couple of the different campaigns. So you see wide variety here. So you've got your malicious PDFs. It looks like the threat actor had compromised some legitimate domains to host these PDFs. Some malicious advertising, online questionnaires were all the different ways that the evil twins were getting on users' devices. So at this point, one of the most important things that we do as the threat intelligence team at Human is make sure that our customers are protected against these types of ad fraud threats, because that's kind of the goal of doing these investigations. So when we started to flag the malicious traffic, what we saw was that the threat actor actually shifted. So one of the things that kind of holds true is that when you find some way to demonetize these threat actors, they will adapt as much as they can, because nobody wants to stop making money, at least threat actors themselves. So what we saw is that they shifted which ad networks they were targeting, particularly to avoid Humans' customers. So we were protecting our customers. They were like, this is not worth it anymore. Let's try something else. And they also updated some of the SSP servers and the SDKs to really try and evade detection, because again, they wanted to make money. They were trying to do whatever they could to make sure that we couldn't get in their way. So again, before we disrupted them, it was about 10 billion bid requests per day. And now we do actually continue to monitor these threat actors. Like Gavin said, we're tracking about 20 different campaigns right now. We still see that it's substantially decreased. We haven't seen any increase in their traffic that we can see yet. So we do still continue to monitor, because oftentimes threat actors do come back. So if you're looking at who was affected, it was mostly entities across the advertising ecosystem, particularly ad networks, but also any developers who potentially could have downloaded and used the Caramel Ads SDK in the case it was abused. We don't have any evidence of that, but also we don't necessarily have any insight or visibility into everybody who would be using it. So, like I said, one of the takeaways here is that this was a new and innovative way that cybercriminals were conducting ad fraud. So we talk a lot about how will threat actors adapt, what are the new TTPs, what should we be staying ahead of. But this was kind of one that was very surprising and also very interesting to see. We actually have seen threat actors use this evil twin method again with the newest Bad Box 2.0 research that we did, which we could talk about after if anyone's curious. So really what they're doing is trying to circumvent official App Store rules to make it harder to demonetize them. So this is just one ad fraud campaign, but as we look at it, we really can see the need that, we should have some sort of collective industry action against this type of threat. So while we are able to keep digital marketing safe in one aspect, it really does benefit everybody. So Gavin kind of alluded to this a little bit, but while we all see digital marketing as like, it's just advertising, like thinking a little bit about some of what these campaigns can be used to fund. So additional types of malware attacks, other bigger campaigns. In order to do so, that's why we should all care. So doing some sort of collective action against this. So one of the things that we've noticed in a bunch of our different campaigns more recently is that as they grow more sophisticated, it's really critical to have different entities in different sort of areas involved. We have great visibility into invalid traffic, but again, we are just one entity and we cannot combat all parts of a campaign. Then, this novel method of ad fraud, as well as some of the other TTPs that we see, makes it a lot harder to do some of the takedowns that we wanted. It's a lot more than we have time to discuss today, but it really does force some considerations of like, how do we approach this type of thing in the future? And then, as I mentioned, as campaigns get more sophisticated, it's very clear that we can't solve this by, just as one singular entity. And as we saw with our Bad Box 2.0 campaign, really getting multiple entities and multiple different individuals from law enforcement and industry and different companies within industry was critical actually to helping us demonetize them more effectively. So, where's ad fraud going? So, nobody's surprised that ad fraud will continue. So we predict the threat actors will continue increasing the sophistication of their campaigns. So like I said, they don't want to stop making money. So they will modify their TTPs. They will try to make it so that it is harder to demonetize, take them down, get them out of the App Store. And the evil twin method is a great example of one of the ways that they recently did so. So keep expecting that. So I also talked a little bit about this before, but it's not just about the ad fraud a lot of the time. So some campaigns, yes, are just about kind of having small ad fraud campaigns, but as we saw with Bad Box 2.0, this was just one little piece of a huge campaign involving backdoor devices, residential proxy networks, and really what the ad fraud was part of is a funding and cash out part of the operation. So if you're thinking about, why do I care about ad fraud? So a lot of the funding part of it and a lot of the cash out for these other campaigns that, maybe something that is on your radar and you do care about, just kind of keeping in mind how the money is made, and that's why you might care about ad fraud. And we predict that it will remain a persistent issue because it is highly lucrative. Gavin gave you some numbers before, but they make a lot of money out of this, so why would they necessarily give up? So where do we go from here? As a collective, what we can do is work to demonetize these fraudulent entities together. So things like digital advertising protection is definitely something to consider. Knowing not only the partners that you work with, but also who they work with, so some sort of like third-party risk approach there. Make the threat actors retool. So we've made them retool several times, not just these threat actors, but many others, by demonetizing them and then making them have to adapt and wasting their time. Then engaging with external partners. So whatever you can share, I would encourage us as a community to share. So detections from malicious apps, suspicious indicators that you're seeing, any infrastructure or TTPs, because ultimately, if we're able to stop things like ad fraud campaigns and other cyber threat campaigns, the industry is safer and organizations are safer as well. Engaging with law enforcement is something that, where relevant, can be extremely helpful because oftentimes they have abilities and powers that we as industry or academia or anything like that don't. And it's important to stay ahead of what's next. So before we found the evil twin campaign, right, we couldn't necessarily predict that it was going to happen, but once we did find it, it really helped open a new way of thinking about how ad fraud can be done. And there's a couple different ways. So using threat intelligence is certainly crucial. And then, we here at Human, after we do take down or demonetize these entities, we're not done. So we continue to track them and make sure that we understand how the campaigns change and evolve. Just recently, we saw one threat actor, the bad box threat actors, go dormant for a little while, and then they came back bigger and badder, as Gavin likes to often say. So it is critical to keep following these entities. And that's all I have today.